am joined for this very special episode of, I guess we'll call it 8 Cubes. I'm not really sure, by TLSG. And we are here to talk about a very focused topic, something that TLSG has an immense amount of insight on, and something that I have almost no insight on: the returning player experience for someone who wants to seriously play Marvel Snap. A lot of hay has been made about the issues Marvel Snap has onboarding new players, but I think an under-discussed aspect of Marvel Snap's monetization model is that it makes it very difficult for a returning player to come back into the game and succeed at the highest level. In another card game, they could just buy a deck. That simply cannot happen here. They remain time gated. And since so many new cards are important to new decks, I wanted to get the perspective of someone who actually did just take 9 months off and then come back. And now I believe last month was like in, top 500, top 200 infinite with an
Yeah.
account that does not have every card, and talk about what that experience was like, how he managed it, and what they can do better about it in the future. So TLSG, welcome to the show. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much. I know that this has been something that I've wanted to connect in a long time,
Mhm.
but our schedules are crazy. I'm glad that we were able to finally carve something out to sit down and do this.
I want to be clear. Your schedule is crazy.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
schedule, like, I don't want to put myself, it feels like stolen valor. Like, I have a very nice and easy job. I'm very grateful to it. You have multiple kids and a real job as well. Very much worse schedule. I don't want to claim that. I don't want to
Yeah,
impinge on that.
yeah. So it gets very chaotic. These things I like doing them because I love Marvel Snap, and so I
Yeah.
like any time I get a chance to talk about it. It's just finding time to actually do it is tough.
So I guess I just want to start there. Like, I love Marvel Snap, right? Like, what does it feel like when you come back to a game that you left sort of on top of, and you come back and you find yourself in this position where it's like, I love playing this game. I don't know what I can play. What is that experience like when you come back?
So, as somebody that really likes to experiment with cards, figure out and kind of dissect the meta, it was actually a lot of fun. Like that was
Okay.
probably like the most fun, even because whenever you have all the cards, if you're losing, you're just either bad at reading, you got bad RNG, whatever. Whenever you have this kind of restriction of coming back, you don't know the combos, you don't know the meta, you don't know the decks, so you're going to get surprised by different things. So being able to learn from like each game is something that I hadn't had since like early beta, because things change quickly but slow enough that you can adapt them if you're playing like every day. So taking those 9 months off, that was like probably the height of coming back. Was first I got mashed against a whole bunch of bots, so I got used to like the energy
Yeah.
mechanics and all of that. But then post Infinite, surprisingly, I think I was like rank 500. It was really close to top 500. Um, and then I got absolutely humbled for like probably the next 2 days as all of these different combos that I didn't know. And I kind of took into account what cards I had, what I was seeing the most of, and at that time it was I think the ongoing Cosmo deck was absolutely obliterating like the Destroy decks, the Phoenix Force, all of that, like really all those decks that were really dominating. And of course the meta shifted again, so it's not quite that anymore. But I was able to find ways to work within what I had, even though like having Cannonball would have been cool. Having Red Hulk at that time would have been awesome. But those were cards that I looked at as I saw. I was like, these seem really impactful, but I can make do with what I have. And there were some learning curves, but I think it was really fun for me as somebody that likes to kind of experience those different card like combos and just be able to figure out what's working well for everyone else and how I can stop it.
So, in that vein, when you first come back to Marvel Snap and you're like experiencing everything that's going on, and you lose to a bunch of weird combos, and you're like, what do I design to stop it? I think this is really worth highlighting because you were the person who really popularized that ongoing list. Like,
Yeah.
out of the sort of restrictions that were placed on you in terms of, I don't have a lot of stuff, you actually created a deck that exists in the metagame now still.
Yep.
And I think that's an accomplishment, frankly, that you don't get enough credit for. I like it's something that is really important. I think like that I wouldn't have been able to do that, I think. Because I have every card. I couldn't have possibly been in the position to do that. But
Right, right.
like we talk about restrictions breeding creativity, right? And so, what is your process when you're looking at a metagame and you say, I can make do with what I have? How do you approach that? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that. A lot of people would love to be able to say, I can make do with what I have, but it's hard. And so, what did you do that led up to that?
So I I experimented. I took what I was seeing a lot of, which I noticed that coming back, most of the ongoing cards that were dominant had been transitioned to on reveal, and Cosmo was just nowhere. And that was the only way I think I could reasonably stop everything that I was seeing. And so that was kind of the like starting grounds of where can I fit Cosmo in. And initially it's a 3 cost. You fit it into a Silver Surfer, but without having Shaw or some of those new resources, it didn't feel like I could build like an optimal or competitive list. And so I didn't think I could come over the top of somebody else running a Silver Surfer. And so then it's kind of going back to, well, what else can I do? How else can I restrict the opponent? And it is tough. It's tough to over, and I don't think that every metagame is necessarily positioned where you could find something
Yeah.
like that. I think I got very fortunate
Yeah.
that for whatever reason, Cosmo and ongoing like had disappeared, and Destroy was like every other game that I was facing, and then in between that, it was like the Phoenix Force decks and just something that typically wants to do impactful plays, but they're big drops. They're not doing a lot of things. So I didn't see any Loki for like the first 2 weeks, and then now it's all over the place, which is kind of what completely counters that ongoing style of play. And I think it like shifted, and or either that or I got higher up in the ranks and I started seeing it more often. But it's just kind of dissecting what you're seeing the most of and what are good ways to stop it. And I think a lot of times they do a really good job with this game of balancing those cards so that there is some kind of counter that can reasonably stop a big play if it's that dominant. And then if not, they typically go back to let's nerf it. Let's find another way to kind of fix this. Kind of like the Professor X cannonball. Like you couldn't stop it. No matter what you ran, they had an answer to just about everything. And so that's kind of the point where you can't really get creative around the Professor X cannonball. Like it's just not going to happen. And so I think if the metagame is in a good, balanced, healthy spot, you can find counters to those big kind of dominant threats that you're seeing the most of.
I think you talked about something that is really important that you only gave like a sentence to that I want you to dive deeper into,
Okay.
which is you talked about why you didn't play Silver Surfer. And you said it was because you would be playing a bad version of the deck in the mirror. And I think
Yep.
that's something that people don't think enough about. Like, instead of playing a bad version of a good deck, play a good version of a good deck. Like, it is almost always better to be doing something with a coherent game plan than to go into every mirror knowing that you can't compete.
Like if they get their ideal draws and you get your ideal draws, if you're not going to stand up to it,
Yep.
You're shooting yourself in the foot. So if that deck becomes popular, I'm going to lose when I'm running those mirrors every time, unless they just get incredibly unlucky. But with that, and with knowing that Shaw feels like a kind of cornerstone in Silver Surfer now,
Mhm.
I think there are probably some versions that you could run without it. But like that's the powerhouse. Like I'm never going to meet the power that Shaw can get to in the Shaw lane.
Yeah.
And so kind of taking what I wanted to do and then making sure that there wasn't a better version of it. So with the ongoing deck that I created, it wasn't that there were tweaks to it. So I didn't have US Agent, which was great at the time. There wasn't a lot of Luke Cage. Now we're seeing a little bit more Luke Cage, so he's a little bit less impactful. But at the time, that would have been more optimal. But it didn't derail what I was doing anyways. And so I was still able to play around not having that piece much more than not having like a Shaw or a Cannonball if I'm wanting to run some kind of like lockdown list.
Yeah, it's about the delta between what you're replacing that card with and the card itself, right? Because like US Agent is a great card on the ongoing list, don't get me wrong, but it has a very specific role, and a card like Mojo is doing the same thing. Like the role is I win the Jean Grey lane. That's what it's
Right.
doing. And so it can be the best at that and also be replaceable as long as the delta isn't huge. With
Right.
Shaw in Surfer, the role is I am your scaling threat, and there is no other 3-drop that accomplishes that goal. And that's, I think, something people should think more about.
Right.
So, spending. I am unfamiliar with your journey. Like, when you came back, what was your plan for spending, and how well did you stick to it?
So the plan, honestly, I didn't have an
Oh, wow.
ideal route when I came back.
Okay.
Like I came back, honestly, not knowing if there was going to be an audience for the videos,
Mhm.
and I've been very humbled that there are people that still, care what I have to say, and that still click on the videos to watch them, because it could have been just as easy that I came back and it was like nothing. And so I didn't know what to expect. I started kind of easy. I just kind of got the itch one day. I think I had finally scrolled past the page on my phone where the app was. And without from not having opened it, and then I saw it and I was like, and I kept going. But I think I like started to think about it. I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
A couple games won't hurt. Like I'll dive back in and see what it's like. And then I started really enjoying it. And then I didn't have like a spending limit necessarily. Um, because I think a lot of that for a content creator is a little bit different. Like I can much more easily justify buying a pack, so I get the new card this week, versus somebody that doesn't have like that extra little bit of revenue that could kind of help offset.
Yeah.
And so I think in that one, I may not be like the perfect representation of it.
Yeah.
But I came back knowing that I would spend like a handful. So the season pass each month for me is like a given. Like the value that you get
Sure.
from that is huge. And then looking at like what bundles came out, if there were core pieces that I needed, that would help me get those quickly and that were a good kind of ratio or value. And so I think I probably overspent what I had planned since I didn't really intend to do a whole lot. But there were so many things that, as somebody that likes to experiment with different cards, like I wanted to try those things. Like I spent tokens on Beta Ray Bill, and I don't know that anybody has ever spent tokens on Beta. Uh, he was one that like really intrigued me. I like the Jane Foster decks. I liked the old Thor lockjaw rotation style stuff. And so like I spent a little bit more so that I could kind of play around with them, even though it wasn't a need at that point. Like I could compete with the other cards, but that one was more of like I want to play with these new toys and see what I can do. So I definitely think I overspent, knowing that I had kind of some form that kind of comes back as like a almost like a reimbursement for those videos I can make now with those different tools.
Yeah.
Um, Had I not had that, I don't think I would have like splurged for a beta. I think I would have waited until he showed up in like the spotlight caches and spent more so on like a Red Hulk or something that felt like it could go in every deck, versus Beta, who is very much like a niche into like one style of build.
As a content creator, you are incentivized to do that, right? Like you especially are like, I need to make a new video about a new thing. I can't just make, here's Cannonball Profx deck number 12, right? Like I can't do that. I have to do something else. How do you think that changed? So like to what degree did that change or dynamically influence your spending? To what degree was it like I can't do content if I don't do this? Because one of the things that I think about a lot is how hard it must be to be someone who wants to be a Marvel Snap content creator and he does not have a full collection.
So I I think it impacted it some, but not as much as I think most would think.
Okay.
So from the content creation standpoint, most of what I can do easily from a fairly large collection, but not complete, is create a deck each week when a new card comes out. Because with the pass, with everything else, I can pretty much keep up with spotlight keys to get the new card each week. And then patches or over the air changes. Like those I don't need necessarily like the shiny, all of the toys. I don't need all of the tools to be able to, make a Stegron deck that works, or make something from like those changes that really impacts a larger audience. It's nice to have, the White Widows and the Nocturnes, but you don't necessarily have to have them to create the content. I think much more than maybe those 2 or 3 decks, depending on how big like an over-the-air patch change was. I think it kind of helped encourage me to spend a little bit more, or spend to get more spotlight keys to get a few more of the cards in that kind of 4-set rotation, rather than just unlock until I get the new thing and then stop. And so I think it impacts it a bit, but not as much as you would necessarily think. I don't think, like, I don't feel like I have to unlock Pixie. I don't feel like I have to get Shaw, because I know decently what they do, and I can create content without that one. It would be nice to have a Pixie deck, but when it happens, it does. It's not one that I have to feel like I spend a little bit more so that I can continue creating content. But I think something that you said with that one is, I think there's definitely a balance there, because I have a large collection. So even being out 9 months, I played from beta all the way up until a little bit after Loki dropped. I think it was Annihilus was the last card that, Annihilus or Black Knight, one of the two, were the last cards that I picked up.
Yeah.
And so I have a large collection still. I have a lot of tools to kind of utilize, but if I was just in Series 3, it's a lot harder to create things as a content creator. So something that you touched on, like, if I'm transitioning from Hearthstone and I was successful there, but I didn't jump in this on beta, without spending a lot, I don't feel like I could really put out good content. So I think because I have a large enough content to kind of support it, I can, but you have to have at least a large selection of cards to make something cohesive and make something work.
Yeah, because like something that strikes me very often is just how many of us knew each other in the beta. You and me and Binks and Dara and Alex and Cozy, and like all of us, and Jeff, like all of us were playing in the beta. We all knew everyone knew each other. We were streaming to like 10 people. Like it's striking to me how little that has changed, where it feels like there's this inherent like this inbuilt advantage in terms of not just having viewership for being there, but also having the cards. There's this sort of inertia that makes it difficult for other people to sort of break into that. And I get it, because it's like, if you want to be a Marvel Snap, if you're coming from another card game, it's like, okay, so here's what's going to happen. You don't do anything for 3 months, you spend a bunch of money, then you can try to make YouTube videos. It's like, it's not a good value proposition.
And if you don't have a following, so like, I'm very fortunate that I think you're probably in the same spot. I'm very fortunate that I started during beta, because one, my videos were awful. Like, it took a while to find like my voice and my cadence and just everything. Like, the videos early were they were bad. But within that, I was able to really hone in. And at that time, it was a stake of like 10 people watching it versus 20. Now it'd be actually being able to take off on a channel. I don't think I'd be able to start now and have the awkward, like, and then I'm going to do this. And while I'm playing a bot unknowingly, like, it was a wild time.
Yeah.
And so I think for someone coming in, it'd be very difficult, unless you have like a Regis, which he played early on too. But unless you have a built-in audience, I think it'd be hard to break out in this game unless you had like that deep collection to start building on already.
So when we talk about coming back to the game, one of the things that really sticks out to me is the way in which spotlight caches limit choices, or allow them, depending on how you look at it, because it's very much, oh, I need to open for a good week rather than just for a good card. How did you interact with the spotlight cache system? How did you feel like agency is a big complaint people have. Did you feel like you had agency? Or if when you came back, you could have just been like, oh, I want this card, and this card, that would have been drastically better, even at a higher price point?
I think that would have been a lot easier. So with the limited agency that the spotlights create, I think the spotlights do a lot of things really well. I never opened a Series 5 card from the collection level naturally before spotlights. And I went thousands of levels.
Same,
so and it was always a weird, like, am I going to pull it whenever it first releases so I can create content on the new card? Like, it was a really like weird balance. So the spotlights did alleviate a lot of that, but it also really kind of pigeonholes what cards are being released into the game, because it's a lot harder to get 6,000 tokens to be able to buy the card that you want.
Yeah.
So like Red Hulk hasn't been in the spotlight cache. I had to find bundles, spend tokens, like acquire those collector's tokens before I could make that purchase. Cannonball was the same thing.
Right,
Rest
and
in
if you're
peace.
not you, though, if you're not
Yeah.
you, or you're not on the same budget, or you don't have the same incentives, you probably aren't doing that, and you just don't have those cards.
Yeah. And so it'd be a lot slower acquisition. I'd have to be a lot choosier. So like I said, I bought beta. I would not have done that. I probably wouldn't have picked up Cannonball, because by the time I did, he was so relevant that he's not going to stay there for long.
Yeah.
It's one of those that he's so strong that something is going to be done about it.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I bought Red Hulk, which is just a good stat stick. He doesn't even have to be played to create that kind of fear or that pressure. And then the other one that I purchased was Mockingbird recently. So with the increase of like Mysterio style stuff and Sasquatch style builds, Mockingbird has a really good home in a lot of Thanos builds. And so those were the two that I spent on. Otherwise, I was able to make do with kind of what came up in the collection or in the spotlights. And so like I think I would have chose a few fewer. So like Red Hulk and Mockingbird, I think were the two. Outside of that, I think I just wait. If I wasn't creating content and had that reimbursement, I think I hold the tokens, except for like those really truly ones that feel like they're in every deck. So like White Widow right now feels like she's everywhere. Nocturne right now feels like she's everywhere. If I miss those, I'd probably be more willing to spend on that than Shaw or Beta Ray, or those cards that aren't as impactful, which I think as a system is kind of tough, because it makes you not want to interact with it, because the resources are so limited. And I can't easily, like, even if I wanted to spend, I can't easily go to the store and say, I'm going to buy 6,000 collector's tokens to buy this card. I have to buy a bundle that may or may not have some included, potentially do the Tuesday, the collector token bundle or shop sale. That's not the best value for the currency. So I have to do inoptimal things to be able to target that particular resource. And I probably wouldn't engage with it outside of what I naturally collect from the collection level.
Yeah, one of the frustrating things to me is, I guess this is twofold, right? Frustrating thing number one is that it feels like there hasn't been a good just deck build around card in a while, where it's like, I bought High Evo and now I can play, right? And High Evo's been a little bit power crept, and frankly, I think he needs a buff. But it's like, that was something that was always very valuable to me, where it's like, new player coming in, what do? You get High Evo. There you go, right? Like, we did it. And as the game has gotten a little bit stronger, thing like the competitive advantage of a High Evo card, like High Evo Cyclops, could probably just be a card they print right now. Like they could probably just print that card, and so the competitive advantage has gotten lower. Nocturne is probably a better card than High Evo Cyclops. Now everyone can play Nocturne, and they don't have to pay the cost for it. And so when you are competing on a budget, trying to find that niche, like we talked about with the ongoing deck, trying to find a way to attack a metagame, trying to find a reason what to do what you try to do, I think that's pretty important. And I think that it sort of sucks to hear how gated this was by, well, it's not in the spotlights, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, for a lot of them, it was. And I think another thing that, unless you're competing on like the highest end, especially if you're just kind of playing and having fun, I think the biggest piece when returning is finding something that you enjoy playing. Like me personally, I don't like Loki. It's a strong deck, but I just don't have fun playing it. And so like that would not be a card that I would pick up if I was on those restrictions. And so like I'd be much more willing to play like a destroy deck if that's what I enjoyed. And so I'd pick up Null, or even though it's always in the spotlight caches, I'd pick up one of those cards that are key to that that kind of build. versus going with what's necessarily the best card. So like, especially since acquisition is going to be a marathon, it's not going to be a sprint. I want to find something that I'm happy with at that time as I slowly accumulate and acquire those additional pieces. And so finding something that you can build, or maybe you're one card off of, I think is sometimes better, except for like those really niche, like high-end, high competitive players. Finding something you actually enjoy doing is going to be more valuable in the long term than buying like the best performing card at that time.
So, on the topic of competing, what was it like for you to come back, play a bunch of bots, and then get immediately dropped into the top MMR bracket? Because like this is a thing that happens to everyone who comes back, because your MMR is too high to be matched with most other people. Your collection level is too high to be matched with most other people. And so you get bots and bots and bots and bots and bots. And one of the weird things that I've noticed, and this happens both with returning players and with new players, is when I beat a bot, I get nothing out of it. I get absolutely nothing out of it. But up to a certain point, it feels like, oh, they beat a bunch of bots, and it just drops them in as if those bots were real people. And I don't know what it is in their system that makes that happen, because it seems like a massive oversight to me, because like you're dropping pool 1 players in my bracket. You're dropping you with no new cards in my bracket. And it's like, what is going on right now, and why is that happening? And what was that experience like for you? Did you enjoy it? You kind of seem like someone who would. And was it rewarding?
So I think I'm definitely the exception, but I did enjoy it, because the bot games for me, they're boring. Once you know how to cheese a bot, and we've played them for so long, it's very stale. Like
Yeah.
you know what that game plan is going to be, and you can kind of just go through the motions. And so not until I hit Infinite, and I kind of got humbled a little bit with how good and how much people were going to be anticipating different plays, did I really have to go into that kind of creativity mode and find something that is going to work within that MMR. But I think, I had a lot of play experience prior to that. If I was a new player, which I think is something you touched on, and something, I don't know if you saw it. I played Marvel Snap for,
Yes.
and I got to Infinite and was like, I didn't have Shang-Chi, and I was matching against people that were in the upper, probably, I think 500, 1,000. And like, there is nothing that you could do at that point. Like, it doesn't feel good at that point. At that level, it sucked. Like, it was the most awful grind. And so I stuck to Conquest after that, because it was just that no matter what you ran, no matter what you did, their decks were more powerful. Like, it, plain and simple. But for me, I had enough tools. I think it goes back to having at least a large collection. I had enough tools that I was able to kind of adapt to, okay, this is what to anticipate when I see Pixie come down. Because before, like, I absolutely probably got swindled for 8 cubes because I didn't know how much that impact could be. And so like, I was able to adapt to those different things. And so as a new player, you don't have things like Mobius to stop. Like, if Pixie was what was dominating the meta, you don't have that resource. And so then there's no counter to it. But for me, I had enough pieces to find ways to stop whatever those dominant forces were.
So for other people who find themselves in your situation, if you're coming back to the game, what pieces of advice would you provide to them?
When you first come back, don't go into it expecting or necessarily needing to compete on the highest level. At this point with the game, you can much more easily reach Infinite. Like during the beta or right after release, hitting Infinite was a struggle some months. Like it was a grind. Now with the way that it works, you're playing a lot of bots. Find what you're enjoying, and find the fun in playing that game. You don't necessarily need to be running the top 100 decks or like being able to compete with those players to enjoy it. So come back and find the card combinations. If you like mill, find a way to make mill works. I know that Glenn has said that it's historically a really low cube deck, and so like for most, you probably shouldn't play it. But if you're just looking to have fun, like I like the style. I enjoy playing that, and so whenever I'm not necessarily trying to grab that ranking or increase my ranking. Like that's what I play around with. You can still win, but it's just not going to be as consistent a win. And so I think my biggest piece of advice is really come into it slow. The card acquisition, don't get caught into, it's almost like a FOMO effect. Like this new card comes out, I see White Widow everywhere. I didn't unlock it in the Spotlight Cache. I need to spend tokens for it. Like she's in a good spot right now. That may not always be the case. There are ways to play around it. Like find a deck that runs Luke Cage. Like if that is what is your biggest like thorn or pain point, find something that you have that can kind of stop that impact that it has on you. And so don't get caught up in like the FOMO of I need everything. Find something that you're enjoying and then like slowly trickle into it because you're going to acquire cards over time. Just engage with those systems. Find something that you want to come back and complete your dailies. And then before long, you'll have your collection growing quite a bit.
That's an interesting approach because it's like, okay, you literally cannot focus only on winning because you will not. If you only focus on winning and you start losing, you're going to be like, I'm not even going to complete my dailies. You'll never get your collection to the point where you can. That seems weird, right? Like, that's a weird dynamic. Right. I don't know if I feel like that's a good thing to happen, but yeah, because like what I always tell people is at the top level, play the best stuff, right? But if your goal is but you're reframing it, right? Like I need to play something I enjoy so that even when I lose, I'll keep playing so that I can complete my missions so that I'm earning the currency to build the collection that will allow me to actually compete.
Right. I think it just makes it the losses sting a lot less whenever that's not like your primary focus. So like if I'm rank 50, losses hurt a little bit more than, if I'm 1,000, I'm just playing things that I enjoy. Because then I'm still doing things and I lose, it's okay, I'll gain it back. But whenever your sole purpose is like competing on that higher level, which I think both me and you a little bit more than I do, but we focus quite a bit on running those good things. A lot of times I forget that's not everyone's like main goal. And so as a returning player, I think definitely keep realistic expectations. Like a new player shouldn't expect to come in and be KM best right off the bat. Like you're going to need some time to learn all the different combinations, all the different cards. And so just slowly play what you're enjoying playing with. And eventually you'll get more tools and you'll be able to start kind of creating those different kind of cool things that you see.
So this is the same question, but it's directed at second dinner. What is it that you were like, man, I really wish they could do this? And I know like the obvious thing here is to be like, oh, well, give me more stuff for less money, right? Like I think that I'm going to say that goes without saying. That would be good for literally everyone all of the time. What is it that they could do specifically for returning players to alleviate that issue of it feels like you just have to grind it up? Like, do you think they could offer returning player bundles? Do you think that would be helpful to people? Do you think that they could offer like maybe like the free Series 3, but like a one-time Series 5 or something like that? Are there ideas that are wandering around in your head that you were like, God, I really just wish they would do that?
So I think they could improve on quite a few ways. So I think the agency in being able to pick up or potentially unlock a certain card. It doesn't even have to be necessarily guaranteed, but you have to be able to have a chance at it. So like in comparison, I used to play Hearthstone.
Yep.
You quit for a while, you come back after a new expansion, you have some kind of bonus that helps you at least to get into it. So like if you've been gone for a while, you get a couple of those cards for free. And so then you're like, oh, cool. That helps me be able to build at least this kind of patchwork build and then grow from there. But I think it's definitely a different beast entirely for this one because we don't have cards that rotate out. So giving a free card, I think, is a little bit more. I think it's a little bit more weighted than giving one of the new cards from a new expansion in like another card game. So I think it's definitely one that, of course, I would like to have it improve, but it's a tough one to make sure that it's good for everybody. Because if it's just returning players, that doesn't necessarily address new players that are coming into the game. And I think it's a multi-sided like issue. So I think being able to have that kind of targeted acquisition, so some way to, like, if I enjoyed Silver Surfer before, but I can't play it now because I don't have Shaw, I'm not going to spend tokens to have one card, but having some way to really pinpoint and know that I'll be able to unlock him either from a bundle or whatever that may be. I think having a little bit more agency on returning into the game to be able to get the tools for that deck that you enjoy, even if it's not like the most competitive, but being able to find a little bit easier path rather than hoping that it pops up in the shop and then holding it for however many weeks it takes to get 6,000 tokens to be able to purchase it. I think right now, with how limited, because the shop is our agency tool, that's where we get to choose. But as a new returning player, or a returning or new player, you don't have as deep of a token pool to choose from. And so those are really tough to come by. Like, you can't just buy, I have surplus gold, I can't just buy the tokens to buy that card. And so then it becomes a really weird game of trying to interact with the systems in the most opportune way to be able to still get that card or get those resources. And so I think being able to improve that, where it doesn't feel like I have to go through and really analyze each different path that I'm going through, some direct path to be able to find those key cards, I think would be the biggest win. Free is always good, but at the end of the day, it's a business. Like, they need to make money as well. And so, like, I think there's definitely improvements that could be made that make it better for everyone else, and they're still able to run a successful business.
So, overall takeaways from returning player. For you, it feels like it wasn't as bad as it could have been because you are the kind of person who enjoys just getting dropped in and just like, I need to solve this problem, right? Like, I have limited resources and I'm going to be the protagonist of this story and solve this problem with limited resources. I do think that for a lot of other people it's a pain point, and I think it's unique to you in terms of your mindset and your skill set to approach it in the way that you have. And while I would love if everyone watching this was like, "Ah, that's a good way to approach it," I also think that that should not elide the fact that there are things that can be
That it's
done
tough.
to alleviate it. Yeah, like, it's tough,
Right.
it's hard, right? Like, and how far in the process would you say you are now? Do you feel like you've made it out? Like, you're now a normal player again? Do you feel like it's over, or do you feel like you're still in process and will be for a while?
So I think I've acquired, for the most part, the cards that are flexible.
Okay.
So, like, I don't have Corvus. I don't have Proxima. So, like, I don't know how to pronounce it,
I don't either.
but I don't have like those, but those are very specific role players in specific decks. So, like, discard, I may not be able to play an optimal discard deck. That's one out of so many other various like decks that I can build. So I think I'm missing some of those that are really pinpointed towards a specific build. So Shaw, Corvus, um, but the ones that I think are the highest impact that could go in a lot of different things, I feel like I've made it out. And at this point, it's just I'm comfortable waiting until the spotlights have the cards that I need, or somehow I get graced with the random one, that always turns into a duplicate and ends up being 1,000 tokens. But I'm comfortable waiting until like 2 months, 3 months, whenever those do pop up. I don't feel like I need those to be able to like brew different builds, because at least from my perspective, like discard, you're not going to improve discard that much. And so, like, especially from like a content perspective,
Mhm.
if somebody's seen a discard build, they know how a discard build works. It's not going to be anything like special or crazy that now is going to take over the game. And so, like, I have all of the pieces to be able to flexibly build different things. And so I feel like I'm in a good spot now, but I will say it took, I want to say it was maybe a couple $100, from the different bundles. Nothing like, I had some people thinking it was going to be in the thousands, but with how big the collection was already and being able to really pinpoint what cards I wanted, I was able to get it with just a
Yeah.
few bundle purchases.
How much did that shortcut you? Like, time-wise? Let's say you didn't spend that money. Let's say you just did Battle Pass.
So just the battle pass,
Would you say it would be like, you like tack a month or two onto that?
maybe a month and a half, except for those specific pieces. So like Red Hulk and Mockingbird, those that I use tokens for,
Yeah.
those are hard to come by. So like unless you're buying the bundles, you're not going to have as much. But
Because they're
from like
not
the
in the
spotlight,
caches, yeah.
right. So besides that, I think it really only helped speed it up, like maybe a month, because I can pretty much keep up with most of the new card unlocks with just the keys that we get from the currency from the battle pass. And so it doesn't feel like I need to spend a whole bunch more to be able to make it possible. And so I don't think it would have been that much longer. Like being able to choose the pieces that I felt were efficient, or were good for different builds that I wanted to play with. I think it really didn't speed it up as much as, but primarily because of how hard that system is to engage with. The tokens are really tough to come by.
Yeah.
So I think no matter how many bundles you buy, those pinpoint purchases are always tough.
Spotlight caches are so weird because they objectively made it cheaper to get cards, but then they also objectively gave you less control over what cards you get. And so like
Right.
when I look at the caches, I look at like what's happening. I think this month or next month, I look at the caches and I'm just like, there's just a bunch of like weird discard cards in here. Why are these in here? Why aren't like good cards in here? Why are we waiting 4 months to get Pixie back in a cache? Why can't that be in a cache? Right? Like, and I'm sure there's like some, I don't know, algorithm or whatever that like tells them like this is what we got to do. But it's just like it does
It,
feel like instead of like it was a mild upgrade in terms of price and a big downgrade in terms of agency.
right, because before we would have those tokens to be able to unlock those that we chose. Yes, we had to wait for the rotation, but we had a bit more agency on when they popped up. We had the resources.
Yeah.
Now, I can guarantee that I'm going to get the card that I want. But like you said, I haven't seen Cannonball back, and I think it's upcoming. But if I didn't buy it for tokens, I wouldn't have had him until he got nerfed.
Yeah.
And so would have never been able to play him in that kind of prime state. And so I think that I really like the spotlight caches and the control that it has on making sure that you get that particular card, but the other ones that are tacked on make it really tough to get those pieces that you're missing. So it's almost like it penalizes you the larger your collection gets.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think that's purposeful. Like that's what I would do if I were designing a thing, right? Like everyone who's already spent a bunch of money, actually, you have to spend more. People that aren't so sure about spending money, here's some free cards. Like that's
right,
exactly
right,
what I would do, right? Like it's such a good system when you have no series 4 and 5 cards because you're just
yep,
getting you're getting
mhm,
so much out of it, right? And then the larger your collection gets, the worse it feels because then you're only feeling the pain of the no agency.
right.
And that, like, I was gonna ask, like, how did that, like, when you came back, were you getting, like 2 cards out of every spotlight, or was it still just one?
So for the first 3 weeks, it was one. It was the new card.
Okay.
Was the only thing that was new.
Okay.
And here recently, I've gotten a few. So I picked up like Celine,
Oh wow,
Tyra,
real game breaker
and
there.
oh, I know. Like,
Celine.
I know, I can't. That was one that I was going to spend tokens on. Like right up there with Howard. Um, but like it was kind of surprising how few new cards I was getting from those caches. Like I think I saw Null, like a lot of those like, staple cards. So I mean, it makes sense that they're in there, but it felt like all of these that were recently released, I wasn't going to see for a month, 2 months. And so now I'm slowly picking up probably two per, especially with the discard. The one that you were thinking, why is this random
Yeah, it's
garbage
for you.
piled in
You
here?
got this.
It's for me. I'm going to finally unlock, Corvus
Yeah.
and Proxima and
Yeah.
all of those that I wouldn't spend on
Yeah.
otherwise. Um, but yeah, it was definitely kind of surprising. It was also surprising how the same the game kind of felt coming back. Like different cards, different tools, but like the core was the same. So like you still have your same counter cards, you still have your like same primary engines that kind of drive that deck build around. And so a lot of differences, but everything felt essentially the same. Like we didn't have anything that just felt wildly different than what it was before I left.
Everyone's just like way better now, though, right?
Like everyone like the stuff that you could probably like sneak by before, you're like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna play this into that on, and then it used to be a surprise factor, but now everybody knows those like cheeky plays, and so you have to just be able to either outplay, out anticipate, or you have to. It feels like you have to play on a much different level. So last month I ended in top 100, but it took really abusing the bounce deck early whenever Sage came out, and then I actually grinded with it was of all things a mill deck, which I absolutely loved. It kind of hit like a sweet spot, and I was able to grind to top 100. But it felt like I had to really be over anticipating what they were going to do. So before you could sneak stuff by, it feels like players in general are playing much better.
Yeah, I feel like the level is so much higher. Like there are arguments. It's like, oh, like people are leaving or whatever, and it's like I that may be true, but I keep feeling like people keep getting stronger. Like players keep getting stronger, and I keep losing edges that were otherwise free for me, right? Because it's like I have to keep up, and it's harder and harder to do. And like now, like things that were like obvious to me but not obvious to others are now obvious to everybody.
Right.
And it's definitely, it feels like there are a lot more just really strong players running around for sure.
And I think part of that is we're finally feeling from the release because we had played for so long up to release, so we had the full collection. We were
Yeah.
engaging with all of those cards, and they were still just learning the different like spectrum
Nova,
ongoing, Odin, all
Killmonger.
yeah, like those cards that we had engaged with for months.
Yeah.
And so I think it is that we're finally seeing those people that were good, that were skilled, get a big enough collection that they're competing more closely with those people that have been playing for the long time.
All right. That's our show. TLSG, tell everyone where they can find you. I assume they know, and you can also find it in the description, but let everyone know.
So you can find me on YouTube at TLSG Marvel Snap, or on I'm so old. Is it X now?
I don't
Not
call it that, just out of
Do you call it
spite.
Twitter
I
still?
still call it
You can
Twitter.
you can find me on that platform
Yeah.
at TLSG Snap, or on Twitch. I don't stream as often as I would like, but it is TLSG Snap there as well.
And one context for like people, like I realize there are probably people who don't know TLSG, which is crazy to me because TLSG was, as I understand it, the first Marvel Snap YouTuber ever. Like in the beta, he was the big one. Like it was like there was TLSG was making YouTube videos about Marvel Snap every day, and that was like something one person was doing. Like this is so. I will also say TLSG. When I started making YouTube videos, there was one person who messaged me and said, "Hey, if there's anything I can do for you, let me know." One person, and it was TLSG. I pointed the wrong direction there. I'm pointing away from you. It was TLSG. But and so like I think that I just wanted to one of the nicest guys in the Marvel Snap scene. So if you haven't checked him out, please do.
Yeah, and I started because I just enjoyed playing the game, and then I didn't ever dream that it would grow into what it did. And so you were always really active during the beta. You were helping people in chat, and so when you transitioned and said you were starting YouTube videos, I knew how daunting that is, and so I definitely wanted to offer the support for somebody that was already doing what I think a lot of the content creators do in terms of like helping people find those combos, but you were just doing it in terms of chat and
I was very
telling people
in a lot of discords.
yeah, telling people that this card was garbage, don't ever run it. This one was like it was true. Like I don't think I ever saw one of those like where you were wrong. It was just you were definitely going to let them know what the better cards were, what the better combos were,
yeah.
even though you didn't necessarily get anything out of it. And so
The
when
thrill
you
of being right on the internet, it's intoxicating, okay?
right
Like
once you start, you can't
you
stop.
can't stop.